Imagine you go somewhere most people never go. Not a place you can describe on a map, not somewhere with a name anyone agrees on, but somewhere that, in the space of a few minutes, changes everything you thought you knew about what you are and why you're here. And then you come back. You're in a hospital bed, or a recovery room, or a stranger's car on the side of the road. And the first thing you feel, before the relief, before the gratitude, is the need to tell someone. So you do. And they look at you the way people look at someone who has had a very difficult experience and may need some rest. For millions of people around the world, that moment is the beginning of a silence that can last 30 years. This is why. The near-death experience has been documented in medical literature since the 1970s. Dr. Raymond Moody first cataloged the phenomenon in 1975. Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel published a landmark prospective study in The Lancet in 2001 following 344 cardiac patients. The International Association for Near-Death Studies, the IANS, has collected thousands of accounts over 4 decades. The data is extensive, the pattern is consistent. But there is another pattern that rarely appears in the clinical summaries. Between the experience and the first time someone speaks openly about it, the average gap is not days or months. It is years, often decades. Researchers who study NDE integration have noted it repeatedly. People who survive cardiac arrest, surgical complications, accidents. People who describe leaving their bodies, moving through light, encountering presences they interpret as divine. These same people go home, sit at dinner tables with their families, return to their jobs, and say nothing. Not because the experience was minor, because of what happened the first time they tried to speak. In survey after survey, experiencers describe the same sequence, the attempt to share. The pause in the other person's face, the careful reframing. You were under a lot of stress. The brain does strange things when it's deprived of oxygen. Maybe don't tell too many people about this. And the decision quietly made to stop trying. One person summarized it in a comment that has stayed with me since I read it. Nobody wanted to hear it back then. Hundreds of thousands of us got here to share this beautiful experience. That phrase, hundreds of thousands of us, is not hyperbole. It is a demographic. The silence doesn't come from a single source. In the accounts of people who have studied this closely, and in the testimonies of experiencers themselves, there are 3 distinct pressures that converge. 3 walls, as one researcher described them, that close in around the experience. The first wall is family. This is usually the first and the most disorienting. The people closest to an experiencer, spouses, parents, siblings, adult children, are often the first to respond with discomfort rather than curiosity. This is not cruelty. It is in most cases a form of protection, theirs and the experiencer's. When someone you love tells you they left their body, traveled through light, and received information they have no way of explaining, there are only a limited number of frameworks most people have available to process that. Mental health concerns are near the top of the list. So family members do what people do when they are frightened for someone they love. They minimize, they redirect, they suggest professional help. And the experiencer, who came to them with something they believed was the most significant event of their life, learns very quickly that love and comprehension are not the same thing. The second wall is medicine. For experiencers who do reach the medical system, the response is almost universally reductive. Near-death experiences are attributed to oxygen deprivation, REM intrusion, temporal lobe activity, the neurochemical effects of ketamine-like compounds released under extreme stress. Some of these explanations may have merit. Researchers are still debating them. But for the person on the other side of the experience, the person who felt, with total clarity, that what was happening was more real than anything they had experienced while awake, being told, "Your brain did this to you," is not an explanation. It is a closed door. Many experiencers report that after 1 or 2 encounters with clinical dismissal, they stop volunteering the information entirely. Not out of anger, out of a recognition that the language they need does not exist in that room. The third wall is the hardest to explain because it is internal. Even without rejection, even with a genuinely receptive listener, many experiencers find that what they witnessed cannot be transmitted. Not because it was vague, because it was more precise than language allows. They describe colors that have no names, presences that communicated without words. A quality of reality that made ordinary consciousness feel, by comparison, like watching a low-resolution recording of a world they once inhabited. One person described it this way: "I realize most people are incapable of entertaining that there is more to our world than meets the eye." The silence in these cases is not imposed from outside. It is the recognition that some things cannot survive the translation. 30 years is a long time to carry something alone. The psychological literature on NDE integration is careful not to sensationalize this, but it is consistent on several points. Experiencers who lack social support for their experience show significantly higher rates of what researchers call integration difficulty, an inability to reconcile the transformed worldview that follows a near-death event with the expectations and frameworks of ordinary daily life. This shows up in relationships. People who have been somewhere that changed their fundamental understanding of death often find it difficult to engage with concerns that feel by comparison trivial. Careers, social hierarchies, small conflicts that everyone around them treats as important. It shows up in identity. There is, for many experiencers, a period, sometimes years, where they feel they are performing a version of themselves that no longer quite fits. They smile at the right moments, they say the expected things, and behind that, they are holding something that no one around them knows exists. And it shows up in grief, a specific kind of grief that has no official name. The grief of having sinned somewhere extraordinary and returning to a world that is not sure it believes you. Coming back, I tried telling people, and my result was like yours. All these years later, the vibe never leaves you. That is not a metaphor. That is a description of a life. Something changed. Not in the experiences themselves. Not in the medical establishment's position on them. Not in the capacity of most families to receive what their loved ones need to share. What changed is where people can go when none of those options are available. The emergence of online communities dedicated to near-death experiences created something that, for many experiencers, had never existed before. A space where the first response to, "I left my body and I need to tell you what I saw," is not silence or concern or redirection, it is, "Tell me more." This is not a small thing. Research on trauma disclosure has established for decades that the act of sharing a difficult or transformative experience, regardless of whether the listener fully believes it, has measurable integrative effects. Being witnessed matters. Being received without correction matters. For experiencers who had spent years, sometimes decades, managing their silence alone, the discovery of a community that treated their account as data rather than symptom was, by multiple testimonies, a turning point. One person described finding such a community after years of silence. "After your NDE, I would have listened to you when you so badly needed someone to listen." That sentence was written by a stranger to another stranger on the internet, and it was received by hundreds of people reading it as something close to a gift. What that tells us about what was missing before is worth sitting with. The silence was never about weakness. That is the thing that the research makes clear, and that the testimonies confirm. The people who stayed quiet for 30 years were not confused about what they experienced. They were not uncertain whether it mattered. They were responding rationally to the repeated signal that the world they had returned to was not yet equipped to receive what they were carrying. They learned to protect the experience by protecting it from disclosure. And many of them are still learning, slowly, carefully, what it means to speak. I want to leave you with a question, not about near-death experiences specifically, not about what you believe or don't believe about what happens at the edges of consciousness. Just this: if someone came to you, someone you loved, or someone you had just met, and told you they had been somewhere you couldn't follow, and seen something they couldn't explain and needed more than anything just to be heard, would you be able to stay in the room? Would you be able to just listen? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone.